Ladies and gents, welcome back to another video. As usual, we've got a box from eBay here, and if I'm not mistaken, inside of here is going to be two iPod Touch 3rd gens. One's running iOS 5 and the other is supposed to be running iOS 3. So let's get these opened up and see what we've got. All right, so very nice. These actually came with charging cables, which is increasingly rare because I think people are either losing them, getting rid of them, or they just don't work anymore because these 30-pin cables are really old. And these appear to be original Apple cables, which is very nice, and they're actually not that dirty, so very happy to get those. But here are the iPods. These appear to be in okay condition, but they're pretty dirty. You can see they are both 32 gigabyte models. They are not engraved, which is very nice. Let's see if they have any power. Oh, this one was already on. This one's powering on there. Let me go ahead and get this connected to power here so it doesn't die. So like I mentioned earlier, one of these is supposed to have iOS 5, which I think is this one because it's got the lock icon, and the other is supposed to have iOS 3. So we should be able to tell basically right away when we unlock it. Okay, so this is the iOS 3 one. I was mistaken. Here we go, 3.1.3. Of course, it's a 32 gigabyte model. That is pretty cool. We're going to talk about this one in just a minute, but I want to go through the setup screen here on this one just to make sure that it's working okay. Okay, and here's the iOS 5 iPod Touch. Just going to check the version on this. I'm sure it's going to be 5.1.1, and yes, it is. So we'll put this one on the side because this one's not too interesting if we're being honest with ourselves. This is what we came for, iOS 3. So the iPod Touch 3rd gen launched alongside the iPhone 3GS in 2009. And this iPod Touch brought some pretty significant performance gains over the 2nd gen from 2008. So the memory doubled. We went from 128 megabytes of RAM to 256 in here, as well as a increase in performance through the updated processor. I'm going to call it the 3rd generation CPU produced by Samsung. And iOS 3, while it really wasn't a breakthrough in terms of features, it brought us the ability to copy and paste. I think it might have introduced voice memos, at least on the iPod Touch. And other than that, I really don't know what was new with iOS 3. I'm pretty sure the App Store launched in iOS 2. And speaking of which, let me get on the Wi-Fi and see if the iOS 3 App Store is working. While we wait for that, we'll see if the iOS 5 App Store is working. I tested iOS 6 earlier and it did not work, so I'm curious to see if either of these will load. And iOS 5 is not working. I'm not sure what the deal is with that. For a while, these app stores worked, and then they stopped working, and then they worked again, and now they're not working. So that's too bad. I don't think iTunes is working either. We'll give that a try here on both of them. My date and time is set correctly, as I can see, but these are not going to load. So having a 3rd gen on iOS 3 is unique, but it's not very useful. The 3rd gen on iOS 3 does not have multitasking. It does not have iCloud access, no home screen wallpapers. As you can see, that was introduced in iOS 4. And of course, here in iOS 5, we do have features such as iCloud, iMessage, all that sort of stuff. And on iOS 5, you can jailbreak and install an alternate app store that allows you to add a bunch of games easily right from your device. Of course, you can sideload applications on both of these iOS versions, but it's much, much easier on iOS 5. So apart from the rarity of finding one of these on iOS 3, because you cannot downgrade this, there's really not much use for a 3rd gen on iOS 3 other than just being unique. You can add music through iTunes or whatever other software you use, but there's no Apple Music, and you miss out on a bunch of features that were introduced in iOS 5, like I mentioned before. This is a 32 gig model. This also came in 64. So 2 high capacities. This was the highest capacity iOS device at the time of launch. the iPhone 3GS stopped at 32 gigabytes, and 64 would be the highest we would see until the iPad 4th gen, which came with 128 gigabytes. So this is an interesting device, and ours is in pretty good condition. But like I said earlier, usability is pretty low. There's not much you can do on here. Let's see if the Apple website will even load. I think Safari is working just fine, but as you can see, it's pretty slow, and my hopes are low. Yeah, it doesn't even load Safari. All right, before we go, let's take a look at some of the wallpapers. I think we're all pretty familiar with the iOS 5 wallpapers, but the iOS 3 ones are a little bit different. So here's iOS 5 on the left, pretty common stuff. iOS 3 gave us some more unique things, such as some of these paintings and some of the landscape scenery. We also got the original iPod wallpapers, which they did have on iOS 5, but there are more to choose from here. So I think I'm going to go with the Wave for iOS 5, and I'm going to go with these Pebbles here for iOS 3. Of course, we don't get a home screen wallpaper. That was introduced in iOS 4, and I just missed it. There we go. There is the wallpaper for iOS 3. All right, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this unboxing and a look at an iPod Touch 3rd Gen running iOS 3.1.3 here in 2024. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.